Hi, Peter Charles here of Hooked4life Fly Fishing. And in my last video I talked about downforce flies, and I used my black-nosed Dace Weamer as an example of how such a fly would work. But I didn't actually show you how to tie the fly. Now I do have an old video that shows tying this on the tube, but I thought I'd update that and show you how to tie it on a hook. This is a very successful series of flies that I've been producing. The name Weamer comes from putting wet fly and streamer together, because these flies mix the construction of wet fly and streamer, and they can be swung like a wet fly or stripped like a streamer. It doesn't matter, so you have options as to how to fish them. So let's get started on how to tie the black-nosed Dace Weamer, and let me show you the materials that we're going to be using today. As I discussed in an earlier video, having an up-eye hook is critical. In this case I'm using a Deepwater salmon single. That's a heavy salmon hook, and this hook will get down on its own without having to weight the hook, which is what I'm after. I don't like having to put lead or beads on a hook unless I'm after a specific kind of action. So if I want something to swim and move in current, like I do with these series of flies, I don't want to add weight. Other kinds of flies is not important, I'll add weight. In this case I'm just looking for a heavy hook. My thread to start off with is a uni thread in a white 6/0. My tag is uni mylar in gold silver size 12. My rib is uni mylar in a pearl, also size 12. The body is white yarn. The hackle is white marabou. The flash is a fine limp pearlescent flash. And I'm using white, black, and this sort of gray olive for my wing. I'm using mylar stick-on eyes, and to cover the eyes I'm using Danville's ultra-fine monofilament. Okay, let's get started and get our thread tied on. Anytime you're using a return eye hook, start with binding down the return. We don't want that popping out while we're tying our fly. Just run your thread back, bring it to the hook point. Now when you're using a hook that has a return eye, one of the options we have is to lay our tags along that side. It kind of fills up that side and fills up the gap that's created by the return. So that's what we're going to do today. So I'm going to measure that off and just tie in my mylar, and you notice I'm tying it in gold side up because I want it to be silver. So if you tie it with the gold side showing, it flips over when you begin to wrap it. Now, this is kind of an important step. I wrap my tags back, and then I bring my thread forward. And the reason for that is, if I don't do that, if I just wrap my mylar back and then wrap it forward again, what happens is when you have a fish hit it, it all comes apart. So this keeps it together. So as you can see, as soon as I start to wrap, it flips over to silver. Now we tie in our pearlescent rib. Same idea, tie it on the side. Put it in our material keeper. Now the white yarn. Now I'll clump these together. And what I normally do is I just run some loose wraps up and then work it back and then work it forward. Try and keep as much as you can along the side. Okay, the important thing about tying this body on is we're going to taper the front end of it. I'm going to put 3 passes with yarn, and I put my yarn in a bobbin. I don't have just a straight bit of yarn because it's hard to judge the length when you're dealing with 3 passes. It's easy to cut off too short a length and you end up running out of yarn. So what I do at the beginning is, as I go down towards the end, I change the angle at which I'm holding it. I'm letting it cover more space, which tends to thin it out. You'll see as I go, I'm keeping my wraps very close together where I'm wrapping the middle of the body, but when I get to the end, I'm spacing those wraps out, and that causes the taper. So let's get going. So as you can see now, we have this tapered body. And what that allows us to do is tie on our bucktail and have it lay down in this fashion. So every piece of material we put on, I'm going to try to maintain that taper. Okay, the next thing to tie on is our pearl rib. You'll notice I'm tying all the tags underneath the hook. I always leave a little extra and then I tie it in underneath, and that traps it and makes sure it doesn't pull out when you catch a fish. So I'm going to tie my pearlescent flash. I always nip a corner out of the bag, and then I use my bodkin to come in and pick out some strands. Usually, yeah, fly like this I might use 3 or 4 strands in that ballpark. I don't heavily dress these with like 15 or 20 strands and make it look like a prom dress. Subtle works for these series of flies. Okay, time to tie on a marabou, and you'll notice I've taken off one side. You don't want to heavily hackle this fly. It defeats the purpose if this thing comes through looking like a broom. So it's meant to be sparse, and to do that you have to reduce the amount of marabou that you use. What's interesting about this is that I found that when we've used this fly and caught a bunch of fish on it, you know, the marabou starts to degrade, chunks of it start falling off, and still catches fish. So the obvious lesson here is sparse works. Make sure you sweep the barbs back, and with each turn, make your pass in front of the previous. So you're working your quill of the marabou forward. Now I'm going to put some soft wraps at the back end of this to keep it down, because I want this to flow backwards. I don't want it to be spiky. It has to meld with the body of the fly. The next step is the white bucktail. Pick from the tip where it's nice and straight and dense. Now with bucktail, don't pick out a great huge clump. We're putting on 3 layers here. If you take great big chunks of this bucktail, it's going to become unmanageable. So I'm going to do 3 things. I'm going to put this over the garbage can, strip out all the loose bits, size it up, make sure there's not stray bits going in different directions, and then tie it on. I don't stack these because I want the fly to have a tapered look. You want this a little bit more than double the length of the hook. Position on top, do a pinch loop, pull up. Now make sure it's straight, because it does have a habit of moving. Put a few extra wraps. And come in with your scissors and come in from the front like this. And cut out at an angle. Now what that does is it creates a taper. You can see this taper right here. Instead of being cut off at the blunt end, which means when you do your head, it'll drop off suddenly. By tapering that bucktail, I can smooth that head down. As you work your way back, put in some softer wraps at the back end of the head. And when I'm doing my streamers, I'm not like a lot of other tyers. I don't go for these teensy weensy dainty heads. I want a big head. I want it to push water. I want it to create turbulence. I want it to move that bucktail and that marabou. So I'm aiming for a big head here, so I'm building it up. So now we're going to tie off our white, and we're going to switch to the Danville ultrafine monofilament. Now I like using the ultrafine because it produces a very nice finish, but this stuff is delicate. I mean, I break it all the time. I'll probably break it once or twice on this fly. So just go slow with it. The next step is to tie in the black and use just a little bit of black. It's just supposed to be a hint of black. Again, pick from the tip where it's solid. Pinch loop, come up, pull up, put a few wraps on, check for position. Now you see it shifted on me. So I took a few wraps off. I'm going to move it. There we go. I left that little glitch in there just to show you. Check, wrap it, check it. Doesn't look good. Unwrap it, move it. You know, you want it on top of the previous material. You don't want it rolling off to the side. That looks good. Bring your thread to the back. Now for the olive gray. I've seen this advertised as olive. I've seen it advertised as Dace. It's really an olive, sort of a grayish olive color, which is one of my favorites. Not only does it seem to work on fresh water, it works in salt as well. It's just kind of a very natural looking color. Hard to find though. But if you can find it, buy 3 or 4. Again, check your position. Okay, the next step is put on our eyes. Just grab your bodkin and pick them off. I tend to use larger than necessary. I feel that predators use the eyes as an aiming point, so you want nice big eyes. Just a few wraps, just to hold them in place. Whip finish. Now we get onto the head cement. First some UV glue, and don't make it too heavy. With UV glue, if you go too heavy to begin with, it becomes difficult to cure. Make sure all the wraps are filled. Now you see I've got a bubble working there. So what I'll do is I'll just take my bodkin and wipe it off. Yeah, just get rid of any excess. Just makes it difficult to get them to cure with the UV lamp. Last bit of some top coat, and just put a small amount on that. All it does is seal the UV and prevent it from being tacky and losing its gloss. And the final step is to come in, trim off any long bits of the flash. You don't want it going too far back. You want the flash to end close to where the end of the wing is, maybe a little bit further, but no more. So there we go, the black-nosed dace tied Weamer style. It's a very effective pattern. It's caught a ton of fish for me. It works for steelhead, it works for salmon, it works for largemouth, smallmouth bass, resident trout, anything that eats black-nosed dace is going to eat this thing. So give it a try, it works. Cheers.